Chapter 2 Mission. Having learned his lesson, Chen Qingchu spent the rest of the trip stone-faced until they finally arrived at Shuanghua City without incident. Although the city wasn't large, it was reasonably bustling. After gaining entry, they took up residence at the mansion of the old Master Chen, the city's richest man. He was also the one who facilitated sending someone to Changchong Mountain Sect to plead for assistance. Two of old Master Chen's beloved concubines had died horribly at the Skinner demon's hands, so he had been desperately looking forward to Shen Qingchu's arrival. He rubbed his beautiful third concubine's small, white, jade-like hands as he moaned and groaned to their whole party, eyes overflowing with tears. "Immortal masters, you must help us. Nowadays I dare not leave my side for a second, for fear that the moment she's careless, she'll be killed by that wretched monster." At these NPC-like lines, a powerful sense of déjà vu made Shen Qingchu's face twitch. He very much did not enjoy the sight of a 60-year-old coot and a young girl in her teens cooing at each other right in front of him. Luckily, Shen Qingchu retained the divine air of a lofty master. After this prefunctory meeting, he aloofly took his leave to his room, leaving Mingfang to make small talk with old Master Chen. Certain privileges came with simply being a master. No matter how aloof you were, no one dared to say anything. In fact, the more aloof, the more respectful the gazes that trailed after you. Soon, Ning Yingying knocked and entered. "Shizun, Yingying wants to go and walk around the market," she said sweetly. Would Shizun like to keep me company?" Speaking truthfully, no man could dislike being so prettily cajoled by a young girl. When she entered, Shen Qingchu had his back facing her, but upon hearing her plea, his heart half melted. He steeled the remaining half and glanced back with the air of one looking up from a book, the essence of cold and detached intellectually, and said blandly, "If Ying wants to go and walk around, she may ask several Shishong or Shidi to accompany her. This master still has things to do before confronting the Skinner demon." Who else would she ask to keep her company? How could Shen Qingchu not know? At the same time, how could he not want to go out and play? Up until now, he'd been hunkered down inside... Oh, 1 second. There we go, that's a little bit better. Hunkered down inside Qingjing Peak's bamboo house, forced to fake being an awesome master of arts and literature, meaning everything he did had to be done blandly speaking, blandly laughing, blandly practicing the sword, blandly being a poser, bland to the point that he often had the urge to scatter a handful of salt over his head. What a damn pain! And now, when he finally got a break to take a trip down the mountain, he was still trapped in his room because of the system stance that the original Shen Qingchu liked quiet and would be unwilling to mingle. Shen Qingchu didn't even want to pretend to meditate, so he laid on the bed, just pretending to be dead. Shortly after sunset, Mingfan entered the room to deliver a report. Finally, someone had come to talk to him, to keep him company. Shen Qingchu couldn't help but want to weep for joy. Every perk belonged to the male lead. Every loneliness, every loneliness to the cannon fodder. Accompanying young girls to view colored lanterns and such. None of that was for their lot. "This disciple has closely examined the corpse," said Mingfan. With this solemn expression, he presented the items in his hand. Shen Qingchu took a closer look. There were 2 stacks of yellow talisman, written upon with cinnabar ink. The paper had blackened to ash to a shade akin to necrosis. "You use these talisman to assess the corpse for demonic energy?" he asked. Shizun's eyes see all. This disciple used the talismans in 2 locations. The first at the soil near the grave of a victim who had been buried, the second beside a yet unburied corpse still at the corners. Even If even the grave soil was this saturated with demonic energy, then that confirms that the Skinner demon was undoubtedly of the demon race. Finally, Shen Qingchu knew what they faced. He cleared his throat, which made his following humph sound either colder. They dare to harm the lives of people within 100 kilometers of Qingchong Mountain? Since these demonic lowlifes came to our door, they can't blame our disciples for enacting justice on behalf of the heavens. Listen, he really did not want to say this corny line so full of hot air, but he'd have been OOC if he didn't. Mingfang glanced at him reverently. Shizun is wise. If Shizun took action, that demon would be taken care of in one strike, ridding the people of evil. I can read. Shen Qingchu could say nothing. It seemed this master-disciple duo was right in the mind of you reign, I worship, a most joyous union. To tell the truth, Shen Qingchu was extremely satisfied with Mingfan as a disciple. Even though he was a rich young master and spoiled rotten, he was never even a little arrogant in front of his teacher. Instead, he was absolutely obedient and incredibly respectful. A man could never dislike being worshipped like a god. Mingfan had also single-handedly handled the travel preparations, from arrangement of food to lodging. If his IQ hadn't inevitably plummeted whenever he laid eyes on the protagonist, transforming him into a schoolyard bully capable of any misdeed, he would also be a promising young sprout. And moreover, as a fellow victim, Shen Qingchu always felt a kind of pity for this cannon fodder disciple who, in the end, Lu Binghua, would throw into an ant pit so that he would be bitten to death by tens of thousands of ants. This trip down from the mountains is for the sake of your training. Unless, as a last resort, this master will not assist you. Mingfan, as the most senior disciple, you must design careful strategies, lest you let that demon harm your fellow disciples. Yes, this disciple has already devised a tactical formation. As long as that demon... Before Mingfan could finish, a person rushed into the room, interrupting him. Shizun! Lu Binghu's face was stark white as he yelled. Shen Qingchu's heart thumped once, but he feigned indifference. What has happened to make you shout so loudly and in such a panic? Ning Ying Shiji went with me to the city's market earlier today, Lu Binghu said. Once evening fell, I urged Shiji to return, but she refused, and somehow she suddenly vanished. This disciple searched the entire street once, but couldn't find her, and he could only come back and plead with Shizun for help. If Ning Ying had disappeared at this critical moment, this was no joke. Night had almost fallen. Mingfan leapt up right away. Lu Binghua, you! Shen Qingchu promptly flicked his sleeve, and the tea bowl on the desk exploded. As a deterrent, it wasn't OOC, and more importantly, it prevented Mingfan from further digging his own grave. Shen Qingchu assumed an expression of barely suppressed anger. If it's already come to this, there's nothing more to say. Lu Binghua, come with me. Mingfan, take a couple of shidi and ask Landlord Chen for assistance. Then go look for your shimi. Mingfan sent a hateful look at Lu Binghua, but nodded and hurriedly left. Lu Binghua remained, his head lowered, not saying a single word. Shen Qingchu knew that this absolutely wasn't Lu Binghua's fault. Ning Ying's role as a female character wasn't just to be lovable and cute, but also to dig her own grave and to be a burden. In the original work, the number of plot twists caused by her sudden disappearances, blunders, or other messes had allowed Airplane Shorting Towards the Sky to drag out the plot for hundreds of chapters. At the time, Shen Qingchu had been rather impressed with Lu Binghua's fortitude when it came to accepting harem members. He never refused anyone, daring to accept even the most troublesome of women, and he did this without being screwed over or killed. Shen Qingchu could only say that, as expected, the brilliant protagonist truly was overwhelmingly cool, awesome, insane, and badass, with a dick longer than the heavens. A normal person definitely couldn't have put up with such things. I wasn't expecting to read that right off the bat. I read this like in one, like 2 days, the entire story, and it wasn't the official version, so I was not expecting to read that. Lo Binghe, who thought Shin Ching-chu had ordered him to stay so as to beat and yell at him, said quietly, "This entire affair is this disciple's fault. If Shizun wishes to punish this disciple, he will neither resist nor regret it. He only wishes for Ning Shiji's safe to return." He looked incredibly pitiful. Shen Ching-chu wanted to pat his head, but as the system's existence obstructed this, he forcefully held back. "Come," he said coldly. "Take me to the place where your Shiji vanished." Lo Binghe and Ning Yingying had lost each other at the most bustling corner of the market. Shen Ching-chu closed his eyes, and he sensed a barely perceivable thread of demonic energy. He followed that thread, which seemed like it would at any moment fray or snap, until he opened his eyes again and found that he stood at the doors of a cosmetics shop. Shen Ching-chu stared at it silently. Could it be that the murderer worked here? Would it be that easy? However, upon entering the cosmetic shop, the thread of demonic energy snapped, dissipating completely. Perhaps the murderer wasn't hiding in the shop and had just come at some point recently. If they had patronized a cosmetic shop, was the Skinner demon a woman? Shen Ching-chu made these stabs in the dark, and he sent Lo Binghe inside to ask a few questions, but this yielded no result. This quest has been offered to him expressly so he could level up. Thus, none of its scenes had been in the original work, so he had no point of reference. Shen Ching-chu, furthermore, acknowledged that he wasn't a master of deduction capable of deep analytical thought, who could infer a multitude of facts from a single clue. When playing room escape or detective games, he'd always run into dead ends. Me too, King. Me too. As he was agonizing, the system thoughtfully notified him. "We notice that you've encountered difficulties. Would you like to spend 100 B points to activate easy mode?" "Shit, if there was something like this, like an easy mode, you should have said so earlier," Shen Ching-chu snapped. "Activate, activate, activate!" He fixed his gaze on the yes option for 3 seconds. The option blinked green and disappeared. Then something in the air sent goosebumps all down his back. Such a palpable demonic energy. As if they were afraid that otherwise no one would find the target. Calling this easy mode was no lie. Shen Ching-chu wasn't the least bit ashamed about using easy mode, and with spirit soaring, he strode in the direction from which the demonic energy emanated. A mere 500 steps later, they had left the central district and arrived in front of an abandoned, neglected home. "This has to be the place. Just look at those ghastly white paper lanterns. Look at those dilapidated gates. A proper haunted house, don't you see?" Shen Ching-chu schooled his expression and turned to Lo Binghe, who had been silently following behind him. "Return to Chen Manor and notify Ming Fan to bring all the disciples and their talismans here." Lo Binghe had yet to speak when his pupils suddenly contracted. He was staring straight at something behind Shen Ching-chu. That didn't bode well. However, it was too late in the end, and a gust of foul wind blew past, slamming the gates open. Shizun, wake up quickly!" Shen Ching-chu woke up. Upon opening his eyes, he saw Lo Binghe opposite him, looking awfully distressed, arms and torso bound, and as Shen Ching-chu roused himself, Lo Binghe heaved a sigh of relief, eyes brightening. Shizun, Ning Yingying echoed. She was tied up with Lo Binghe, her expression miserable. Shen Ching-chu was a little dizzy, and he had no idea if whatever the crap the demon had sprayed on them had any side effects. He was in a foul mood. This easy mode was straightforward to the point of mercilessness. It had delivered him straight into the boss's mouth. The worst part was that the dignified Peak Lord Qingjing of Qingjing Peak had been unexpectedly struck down by a mini-boss, and that shortly after he woke up, the system shrilly declared, OOC, B points, -50. He'd just spent 100 B points to activate easy mode, and now in a flash he'd lost another 50? How could he not be distressed? The original Shen Qingchu's skill at facing down demons should have made this quest as easy as killing a chicken with a knife. Shamefully, the knife had failed to even hit the chicken. In seconds, Shen Qingchu discovered something that made his mood even worse. His body felt a little strange, he was chilly, and he had a slight ache all over. Upon lowering his head, he almost couldn't stop a fuck from leaving his mouth. He'd been stripped naked. Only his upper half had been stripped naked, but that was already horrifying enough. Regardless of everything, Shen Qingchu was still a Peak Lord. This appearance with his upper half stark naked, his lower half wearing only a pair of pants and white shoes, and his 4 limbs bound tightly with a thin rope as he laid sprawled on the floor. What was this? He looked exactly like a tender pretty boy caught in bed during an illicit act. No wonder the system had deducted 50 points straight off the bat. It was deserved. Even taking him to 0 would have served him, right? Shen Qingchu's face went from red to white and back. He wanted to dig a hole in the ground with his sword and bury him for a while, but his sword had disappeared without a trace. Of course, Lo Binghe looked both worried and a little embarrassed. He definitely assumed that having seen Shen Qingchu in such a sorry state, he would inevitably suffer more vicious retaliation once they got back. Shizun, you finally woke up, Ning Ying Ying sobbed. Ying Ying is so scared. Scared? If you're scared, then don't go running off wherever you feel like it, young lady. Shen Qingchu gave up. 1 second. Yeah. At this time... Damn. At this time, an unsettling chuckle came from behind him. A tall, dark silhouette emerged from the pitch blackness. The great Chengchong Mountain, the great Peak Lord of Qingjing Peak. This is all you amount to? If the so-called greatest sect in the world is full of your sort, the day the demon race conquers the human realm is just around the corner. This was followed by another bout of crazed laughter. The speaker's head and face were covered with a black veil, and their voice was hoarse and unpleasant, as if their throat had been ruined by opium smoke. Shen Qingchu squinted. The Skinner demon? That's right, that's me. I'm the Skinner demon. How wonderful that the illustrious Xiuya sword has fallen into my hands today. Shen Qingchu, even if you think until your wits give out, you won't be able to guess my identity. Why wouldn't I be able to guess? Asked Shen Qingchu. The Skinner demon said nothing. You're dear, aren't you? The Skinner demon had said nothing again as they lifted their veil, and she snapped in irritation. Impossible! How did you guess? Shen Qingchu was speechless. Did she think he was blind? That he couldn't tell from her figure? Men love to look at bodies first before the face, okay? With that curvy bust and bottom, plus that tiny waist in between, she could only be a woman. Also, the room's furnishings smelled rich, and you couldn't find that just anywhere. Of course he knew that they'd been transported back to Chen Manor, and while Chen Manor had many women in residence, he'd only seen a couple and only been introduced to deer, so if he had to guess, of course he could only guess deer. He didn't know anyone else's names. How could he guess them? But who knew you'd lose your cool so quickly, without denying it even a little bit, and jump right to lifting your veil? Could he say this? Could he? Listen, how could he say this out loud? He could only swallow it all down. Deer, or to be clear, the Skinner demon, quickly adjusted her posture and donned the face of old Master Chen's beloved concubine, thus recovering that infinitely tender, stunning, and delighted smile. Not bad. It was indeed me, but Shen Qingchu, even if you guessed until your wits gave out, you couldn't possibly imagine why a weak and delicate woman like me would be the culprit, right? Shen Qingzhu straightened, struggling to assume a posture that was more natural, less rule-violating. Bosses traditionally receive time to monologue. How could he not offer this courtesy? Deer didn't need his encouragement and continued unprompted. The Skinner demon comes and goes without a trace, not because I can fly through the skies or disappear into the earth, but rather because every time I finish killing a person, I change into their skin. By wearing these women's skin and imitating their behavior, I could blend into the crowd and none the wiser in search for my next target. That's not right, said Shen Qingzhu. Deer's expression darkened. What's not right? Suppose every time you killed a person, you changed skins. For instance, when you killed Deer and you wore her skin, you became Deer, but Deer's skin corpse would still be there. Wouldn't someone find it strange that there are two Deers? Although, if he thought about it for a moment, he understood. It wasn't like this world had any DNA identification. After skinning someone, all you had left was a messy lump of bloody flesh. Pretty difficult to tell exactly who it had been. Looks like you figured that one out too, said Deer. Not bad. I used the current woman's corpse to substitute for the last woman's. For example, when I killed Deer, I was wearing Shanger's skin, so everyone at the time thought Shanger was still alive. After I'd donned Deer's skin, I disguised Deer's corpse to look like Shanger's before it was found. This villain's professional integrity was really impressive. Not only had she exposed her inner thoughts and feelings, she also explained her methods and line of criminal reasoning in detail, offering examples and providing personal experiences. Deer was more diligently thorough than a college entrance exam cram school teacher. Lo Binghe had been silently listening the entire time, his eyes glittering with traces of anger. His juvenile sense of justice has been stirred by this perverse demon's cruel actions. Meanwhile, Ning Yingying's head was spinning from all the shangs and Ds. She couldn't understand it at all, but she didn't dare interrupt. After a certain amount of time, you always... Oh wait, that's not her. After a certain amount of time, you always change skins. Is this all a whim, or do you have to? Asked Shen Qingzhu. Deer sneered. Do you think I'd tell you? You've already told me plenty, all right, sis. Or is it bro? What's one more? Deer walked towards Ning Yingying and towards where Ning Yingying and Lo Binghe were bound together. Lo Binghe remained calm, but Ning Yingying screamed, Demon, don't come near me! Shizun, save me! Deer chuckled. Your master has been bound with my immortal binding cable. Spiritual energy can no longer flow anywhere in his body. He can't hope to protect himself. How could he save you? Ah, that explained it. Shen Qingzhu had been secretly attempting to gather his spiritual power, but it seemed obstructed. It didn't feel nearly as plentiful as it usually did. Deer had re-engaged monologue mode. Damn, if it weren't for my damaged martial aspects, I wouldn't need to constantly change skins and absorb human chi. You're a brat, but your skin's luscious and tender, and you're a disciple from a prestigious sect. I expect I'll be able to use you for a good long while. And after I suck your skin dry, it'll be your master's turn. That way, I'll make sure that the Shuya sword didn't live his life in vain. Lo Binghe stared, silent. Shen Qingzhu stared, also silent. What was that she said? You think I'd tell you, right? Not only have you told me, you also seem to have made the astonishing decision to reveal your plan. The professional standards of this world's villains are beyond salvation. So, Shen Qingzhu said in his mind as he shamelessly called out to the system. If I make a mistake during a quest and I end up dead, will I get a chance to reload and try again? Only the protagonist is granted the privilege of plot armor, said the system. Great. Good. Good thing this villain had an illustrious quality of must answer every question. If Shen Qingzhu wanted to stall for time, he needed only to toss more questions at Deer. Have you only been targeting young, beautiful Haven't you only targeted young, beautiful girls? He asked. I never said I only pick young girls, young, beautiful women. As long as they're good looking and their skin is fine and smooth, I'll take anyone. It's just that most of the time, a man's skin isn't as good as a woman's, and the skin of the elderly is never as good as that of the youthful. As expected, Deer chattered on, then suddenly her eyes flashed green with envy and her expression grew yearning as she began to rub her hands painted with scarlet nail dye over Shen Qingchu's upper body. However, cultivators really are different. Even though you're a man, your skin is so glossy and smooth. It's been so long since I've had my male skin. As he was felt up by those searching hands, Shen Qingchu broke out in goosebumps, though he strove to give off the air of spotless and untouchable. Part of him was disgusted, but another part was sympathetic. Honestly, this demon was quite pitiful. It sounded like Deer had originally been a man, but they had to keep using the skins of women due to their condition. After such a long time, of course that would make you a little twisted. In any case, right in this moment, the demon was wearing the infinitely lovely face of a concubine, being felt up all over by those lovely hands. Shen Qingchu inevitably became embarrassed, and he involuntarily shrank back a little. This vision, that moment, struck Liu Binghe to his core. Until now, he'd only ever seen Shen Qingchu's aloof and remote attitude. His derisive expression. But here now a faint, uncontrollable red flush formed on that face, and the way those eyes darted away. Also, Shen Qingchu's upper body was completely bare, but for the thin yet unbreakable immortal binding cable and the red marks it left, and for Shen Qingchu's long, disheveled jet black hair, neither of which concealed anything. Liu Binghe's chest was burning with a convoluted emotion that was impossible to describe. If you had let Shen Qingchu think up of an analogy for his emotions, he would have said that it was like watching a beautiful romance movie, only to discover at the end that the protagonist was that English teacher who'd always pick on you to answer questions, and who, if you failed to answer, would give you your palm 300 lashes. In short, it both shattered Liu Binghe's worldview and did him great injury. Shen Qingchu suddenly grinned. Why are you smiling? Deer asked warily. I'm amused at you and your poor judgment, said Shen Qingchu, slow and deliberate. Pearls before swine, as they say. There are 3 options here, yet out of them, you keep overlooking the most suitable vessel. At these words, Liu Binghe's face went pale. He could never have imagined he'd be randomly thrown to the wolves. However, Shen Qingchu wasn't speaking thoughtlessly. Remember who Liu Binghe was? In truth, he was descended from a line of ancient heavenly demons. Legend had it that these denizens of the heavens had fallen to depravity and become demons, so they were called heavenly demons for short. As the future princes of demonkind, their bloodline was first class. If an ordinary demon got their hands on such a body, forget repairing a damaged martial aspect, would there be anything they couldn't do? There we go. Deer looked Liu Binghe up and down. The latter strove to appear calm, but inside he was panicking and didn't know what to do. Even though he thought until his wits gave out, he couldn't figure out why he had suddenly become the star of this standoff. If you want to trick me, you need a better lie, said Deer. This brat's appearance and aptitude may be exemplary, and his skin fresh and tender, but how can he compare to you? You've reached the stage of mid-core formation. With your level of insight, it's no wonder your martial training was unsuccessful, said Shen Qingchu, smiling. Think about it for a moment. What kind of person am I, Shen Qingchu? If this child possessed excellent aptitude and a fine appearance, but nothing else, why would I accept him as my disciple? If I only wanted a disciple with excellent aptitude, could I not have my pick of talents who fight to enter Chengchong Mountain sect every year? Though naturally my thought process cannot be explained to outsiders. Deer wavered. Excellent. This villain's IQ was truly ridiculously low. They were easy to trick and They were so easy to trick that even though Shen Qingchu had conjured a hasty explanation riddled with logical holes, they actually seemed to half believe it. Shen Qingchu struck while the iron was hot. If you're suspicious, there's an easy test. Let me share a method by which you can verify my words. Go over there and strike him on the crown of his head. Then you'll know whether I'm lying. Lo Binghe's face turned ghastly white. Though he was mature for his age, he was still a child. Even most grown men couldn't stoically face their death, let alone a boy who was only 14 years old. Shen Qingchu tried very hard not to look at him, and he desperately apologized in his heart over and over again. Bingy, you're a man of virtue. Please, magnanimously. I'm not going to be able to say that word, I'm sorry. Magnanimously. Forgive my smack talking and backstabbing just this once, okay? I'll never do it again. I'll definitely make it up to you in the future. Shizun, you can't be serious. Ning Ying Ying was scared witless. Shen Qingchu was on tenterhooks. It didn't even occur to him to comfort her. He only smiled at Deer. You don't know if I'm telling the truth now, but you'll know as soon as you try. Why hesitate? It's only a single strike against an insignificant boy. Even if I were lying to you, you aren't risking anything, are you? Or are you worried that I'm telling the truth, so you dare not hit him? In the eyes of anyone who didn't know the truth, these were the words of a man eagerly pushing Lo Binghe to his death. Lo Binghe stared in disbelief. He wondered bleakly if Shen Qingchu's hatred for him had truly become so great. But if that were the case, why had his master been just a little nicer to him on their trip to the city? Lo Binghe couldn't help but start struggling with all his might. The ropes restraining his body became tighter and tighter, biting painfully into Ning Ying Ying's, but she didn't even dare breathe loudly and just quietly sobbed. Shen Qingchu's words and tones were powerfully persuasive. Deer thought for a moment and decided at last that, true enough, they had already killed so many people. How could they be afraid to kill one more? They snorted. I want to see exactly what sort of foolish game you're playing. As they said this, they strode towards Lo Binghe and brought their palm down. It would be over in an instant. Shen Qingchu's pupils contracted right as Deer's strike came down. By curious coincidence, a ceiling beam broke. If Shen Qingchu had still been reading Proud Immortal Demon Way upon seeing this described, he definitely would have thrown down his cell phone and started screaming curses. The system had already declared it so. So one unbreakable ironclad rule was that the protagonist could not die, meaning that as soon as the protagonist's life was threatened, a death flag would be triggered. Shen Qingchu purposely goaded Deer into attacking Lo Binghe in order to take advantage of this rule. He just used someone else to do his dirty work. Admittedly, this was rather unscrupulous, but Lo Binghe probably hadn't been in real danger. And if Shen Qingchu hadn't done this, he would have had to pay the price himself. In long term, even if he threw Lo Binghe under the bus this one time, there would be more chances to farm his favor in the future. However, to Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky, what do you think of your readers' IQs? How could a ceiling beam suddenly snap in a perfectly fine, splendid, and beautiful new mansion? Even if it was to let the protagonist escape with his life, this twist was still downright contrived. What's the difference between this and a third-rate melodrama where the male and female leads are just about to marry when they're suddenly hit by a car and a tragic twist ending? Downvote! And the practically brand new ceiling beam fell straight down and just happened to coincidentally smash into Deer, smacking them flat onto the ground, rendering them unable to get up. The beam also coincidentally smashed into the pillar Lo Binghe and Ning Ying Ying were bound to, causing it to slant. Ning Ying Ying had already fainted from shock, but after some struggle, Lo Binghe's ropes had, further coincidentally, loosened. After this string of coincidences, Shen Qingchu, who was still on the ground and bound by the immortal binding cable, watched as Lo Binghe stared unmoving at the fallen Deer in a puzzled silence. Was this it? Just as Shen Qingchu thought that, Deer overturned the ceiling beam and sprang up. Shen Qingchu, they snarled, enraged. The schemers of Changchong Mountain are truly shameless and despicable. What sort of dirty trick did you use to ambush me from behind like that? Shen Qingchu was in fact completely innocent. This had nothing to do with him, really. If anything, the chief culprit was Liu Binghe. So you really were lying to me, trying to draw my attention away so you could sneak attack me, Deer snapped, unforgiving. Otherwise, why would a perfectly good ceiling beam come crashing down and just happen to smash into me? They also had the wits to notice that the parts of the scene that were illogical, so their IQ wasn't beyond saving. Shen Qingchu was a little relieved. Deer sneered. You thought this would be enough to stop me? Keep dreaming. The immortal binding cable on you can only be cut by another immortal sword. You can forget about breaking it via any other means. I just praised you and you goof up again. Don't reveal how to free the enemy, Deer. Also, did Deer think that no one could see where they put Juya? They even specifically drew back their cloak to show its place on their hips and patted it. Shen Qingchu couldn't contain his exasperation, and he took a chance to communicate with the system a little. I need to ask, are all villains in this mold? To guarantee your ability to clear the beginner level quest, activating easy mode set the villain's IQ to below average. So not all bosses would be this easy to fumble through. Shen Qingchu thought it was a bit of a pity, but he still smashed the like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up. This easy mode of yours is still a bit too user-friendly. Deer gritted their teeth. I won't listen to you no matter what you say this time. Accept your death, Shen Qingchu. One last thing, Shen Qingchu shouted. Sure enough, governed by the easy mode. Deer stopped. What last words do you still have? Shen Qingchu thought for a while. How does it feel to sleep with a 60-year-old coot? Deer was struck silent, but they were subsequently so enraged that their expression twisted, their entire body trembling. Liu Binghe took the chance to suddenly rush the demon from behind. He snatched Shuya from Deer's hip, drew the sword, filling the entire room with pure white light, a curved flash of silver, and the immortal binding cable on Shen Qingchu's body was nearly severed. Once more betrayed by the IQ loss of easy mode, the mini-boss Deer had completely ignored the existence of a living, breathing Liu Binghe standing right behind them. Deer cried out in fear, This is impossible! Enough! I'm not the listening type. I don't want to hear a rote analysis of the boss's true motives right before their deaths. The corner of Shen Qingchu's mouth twitched, and he gathered all his spiritual power into his right hand, lashing out with a palm strike and smacking Deer in the chest. The demon flew back, like a kite, with a snapped string. This was the first time Shen Qingchu had killed someone, but he didn't hold back, not even a little. First, because this was a book. Second, because this was a demon who'd killed countless people. And third, because if he didn't, he'd be the one who got killed. Shen Qingchu gazed down at the horrible state of Deer, 4 limbs twisted and broken, bleeding from the 7 facial apertures. He turned away, bombarding his own brain with a barrage of his 3 reasons until they blocked out the screen of his mind. Striving to remain calm, he slowly and straightly settled his heart and breathing, fixed his posture, and turned to Liu Binghe. This is your first time seeing someone eliminate demons and upholding justice, he said. Were you scared? Liu Binghe's still childlike face was slightly pale. If you wish to uphold, you must eliminate, said Shen Qingchu, composed. Liu Binghe gritted his teeth. His voice quavered. Shizun, if this disciple may be so bold to ask just now. When the second half of the sentence didn't arrive, Shen Qingchu spoke. You want to ask if that ceiling beam hadn't suddenly come crashing down, what was this master's plan? Shen Qingchu had no choice but to suffer in silence. He yearned to tell Liu Binghe, don't worry, even if the ceiling beam hadn't collapsed, perhaps the wall would have. Even if the wall hadn't, perhaps the pillar would have. Long story short, you definitely wouldn't have died. The boss definitely would have, and that's all there is to it. but he couldn't speak these words, so he could only adopt an unpredictable air and evade the question by changing the subject. If you're asking this, are you blaming this master? Lo Binghe shook his head. No, he said, his expression sincere. If this disciple could give up his life for Shizun, it would be an honor. Not Shizun. Shen Qingchu was shaken. This kid really was too much of a white lotus. Then this master will promise you in kind, he said after thinking for a moment and settling on properly ambiguous words. Even if an accident befalls this master, no misfortune will come to you. This was an absolute truth. Even if Shen Qingchu died 100 times, 100 times, Lo Binghe, the protagonist with impervious plot armor, would go on living in perfect health. On this matter, I speak nothing but the truth, his voice resounded as he said this, his expression confident and collected, without the slightest hint of falsehood. When Lo Binghe heard these words, it was as if his life force had been ignited. The sunflower had begun to wilt, revived. The sunflower that had begun to wilt, revived, full of renewed vigor. Holding Shuya in both hands, Lo Binghe lifted the blade until it was even with his brows and presented it to Shen Qingchu. Shizun, your sword. Shen Qingchu grasped Shuya, taking it from him. Internally, he wiped away his sweat. For now, this child was too easy to dupe. He'd been thrown under the bus and frightened out of his wits, but a couple of words were all it took to restore him to full health in the blink of an eye. But in the future, he wouldn't be so easy to fool. The path to adulthood truly was tangled with thorns and suffering. Then a series of system notifications came at him like a succession of cannon blasts, sending Shen Qingchu to Cloud 9. Ning Yingying's favor increased. Protagonist satisfaction points plus 50. Obtained high-level item Immortal Binding Cable. Villain strength plus 30. Beginner level quest B points plus 20. OOC feature unfrozen. From this point on, you have full command over Shen Qingchu's account controls. Congratulations. Please continue to work hard. Shen Qingchu had fallen a little in love with the sensation of these dramatic ups and downs and intense joys and sorrows. It was basically gambling, and now the OOC feature was unfrozen. From this point on, he could finally carry out the great and glorious task of clinging to the male lead's thighs. Upon returning to Chengchong Mountain, the first thing Shen Qingchu did was ascend Chongding Peak, which was safeguarded by the sect leader, and reported his work to Yu Qingyan. I believe that's how you say it. Previously, Shen Qingchu had thought Songmen Shishong essentially was basically that of a quest-giving NPC, but as soon as he entered the mountain gates, his impression disappeared without a trace. This impression disappeared without a trace. Shen Qingchu had yet to enter the main hall when Yu Qingyan descended upon him, leading a routine of Chongding Peak's disciples to welcome him. They had just come face to face and smiled at each other, and hadn't yet even said anything when Yu Qingyan's right hand grasped Shen Qingchu's wrist. Shen Qingchu was instantly surprised. However, Yu Qingyan made no further movements and instead examined him attentively through his pulse, even inserting a mild spiritual flow of his own to investigate Shen Qingchu's. He realized that Yu Qingyan was only inspecting his spiritual cultivation, and he relaxed. After a moment, Yu Qingyan let go, and he smiled and walked away with Shen Qingchu into the main hall. How was the training? His tone was like that of an eldest brother, which made Shen Qingchu remember his former self's two brothers. He felt a slight sorrow, but greater still was the comforting sense of warmth, to the point that even his dejected report came out cheery, unsatisfactory. His disciples hadn't so much as glimpsed the Skinner demon's shadow. Speaking from the angle of disciple training, the trip really had been a bust. No need to rush, Yu Qingyan said. Shen Qingchu nodded before suddenly changing the topic. Sangmen Shizhong, I wish to go to the back of Chongding's peak and enter secluded cultivation in the Lingshi caves. Chongding Peak was the head of the 12 peaks, and naturally it collected the essence of heavens and earths. As for the Lingshi caves, there was Chong they were Chongding Peaks. My God. Best location for cultivating, giving twice the results in half the time. Therefore, the sect's most senior members and outstanding disciples could request permission from the sect leader to enter the caves for secluded cultivation. Only with the sect leader's approval could they act upon this desire. I did not just do that, did I? If Shen Jingtru wanted to enter seclusion in Lingshi caves, he was sure Yu Qingyan wouldn't refuse, but the smile on Yu Qingyan's lips froze a little, his expression changing slightly. Shen Jingtru sensed something strange, but his strangeness flashed by quickly. For the Immortal Alliance conference? Yu Qingyan asked gently. That's correct. It wasn't only because of the Immortal Alliance conference, though. The incident with the Skinner demon made Shen Jingtru realize the importance of diligent cultivation. In this world, you only had the right to think about the future if you had the strength to meet it. After all, bosses wouldn't always be on easy mode and saddled with below-average intelligence. Before entering seclusion, Shen Jingtru called Lu Binghe over and handed him an actual cultivation manual. Why is Shizun giving this disciple a completely different manual? Lu Binghe asked as he received it. Your constitution is a little different, so you can't cultivate properly by following ordinary methods, Shen Jingtru bullshitted solemnly. He didn't want to personally reveal the truth, that Shen Jingtru had inspired Mingfang to give Lu Binghe a fake cultivation manual, even though eventually the truth would be exposed. As he stared after Shen Jingtru's retreating back, Lu Binghe held that manual in both hands, his heart profoundly shaken. Shizun had specifically given this manual only to him. Shen Jingtru glanced back a couple of times and saw Lu Binghe still standing there, dumbstruck. He rubbed at the spot between his brows and kept walking. He didn't know what Lu Binghe was thinking, but the boy was almost certainly thinking too much. The Lingshi caves were like a labyrinth. After traveling down 1,000 twists and turns, Shen Jingtru emerged in what seemed like a different world, strange and beautiful. Here there was neither wind nor moon, yet it was cool and quiet. Together, white stones like clouds and green stones like jade created wonders large and small, as well as the natural stone beds. At the center lay a pool of clear water that reflected this other world like a mirror. The only thing that marred the beauty was that some cultivator who'd previously gone into seclusion here hadn't properly cherished this public facility. The cave walls were covered in countless gashes and gouges made by both blade and sword glares. The stone walls were further plastered with swaths of dried blood, and the stains had already blackened. This was only one cavern of many, and though it looked a tad like a murder scene, Shen Jingtru was very satisfied and had no plans to find another location. He sat on the stone bed and began to cultivate carefully, following the methods he'd memorized from manuals. Then, as if the heavens didn't want him to try to honestly farm B points, not long after he began meditating, he heard a strange sound. Panting. The panting of a person in pain. At the same time, he sensed a burst of nigh rampant spiritual energy. All right, he knew what had happened. The Lingshi caves were gigantic. Of course Shen Jingtru couldn't be the only other person who had asked permission to enter seclusion. Someone else was cultivating here as well, and they had entered a chi deviation, which was currently at a critical juncture. I only wanted to cultivate in seclusion and farm martial skill points. That's all. Can you not do this? Can you not? Shen Jingtru's eyes snapped open as he decided to investigate. He followed that sound and the waves of spiritual energy as he navigated the various twists and turns. As he went, the disturbances became larger and larger. At last, he arrived in another cavern. As soon as he entered, he saw a figure clothed in white, facing away from him, their long sword stabbed into a rock, all the way to the hilt. Sword glares flew in every direction, without order or pattern. The smears of blood on the person in the white said victim, but their movement said crazed murderer. This person's chi deviation was pretty horrifying. Shen Qingchu mulled it over. With his half-assed knowledge, if he tried to smooth this person's spiritual circulation, it was hard to say whether he would be more likely to help or accidentally stab another spiritual knife into the fellow's back. It was then he caught sight of that sword. With its master's spiritual energy out of control, the sword trembled unceasingly, pulling itself free at a sliver at a time, all white emitting an ear-piercing shriek. Silver light ran down the hilt's engraved incantations and phoenix ornamentation in an unending stream. Shen Qingchu needed only a slight glance to recognize which sword it was. Whose sword it was. Fuck, of all people. He had to meet that guy? Before he'd wanted to help, but now all he wanted to do was flee for his life. It was too late. The person in white swung his head around, having already detected his presence. In any other stage, Shen Qingchu might have declared, "What a beautiful man!" But a man could be as beautiful as he wanted, and if he glared at you with crimson eyes and bulging veins, you'd scramble to kneel, okay? Shen Qingchu fled with a flick of his sleeves, but the man slapped the stone wall and sent rubble flying. The long sword finally broke free of the rock, and it shot through the air to stop before Shen Qingchu's eyes, blocking his path. He barely managed to break in time. Had he been running even a little faster, he would have been beheaded. In the next instant, the white-clad man rushed him, his eyes devoid of reason. Shen Qingchu knew it was too late to run, and he could only steel himself to meet this fight head-on. He drew spiritual energy into his right hand, putting everything into this one blow. He struck the man's chest. If this person really was the man the rumors painted him to be, with enough martial power to take on the protagonist's OP abilities, this hit would be damn near useless. Not only would it be damn near useless, Shen Qingchu might be the one sent flying 10 meters back while coughing up fresh blood or something. However, it wasn't useless. The one sent flying a meter back while coughing up blood wasn't Shen Qingchu, but the other guy. Shen Qingchu raised his right hand while staring at the person he knocked flat. To think he was already this badass without even making the effort to fake it. In truth, while those who entered chi deviation were terrifying when berserk, they were also terribly fragile. With luck, a single strike could be the last straw that broke their back. Expression conflicted, Shen Qingchu watched the man half kneel in pain, straining to rise and rip into his foe, only to collapse back onto one knee. At last, Shen Qingchu sighed and moved closer, placing a hand on the man's back. Let me say this first. Shen Qingchu didn't concern himself with whether the man could understand him. He was saying it for himself. If I don't help you now, it'll be too late. I'm not familiar with how this works, though, so if you know. Anyhow, I'll have tried my best, so don't blame me. After who know how long, Shen Qingchu felt the man's spiritual circulation gradually even out and return to normal. His worry slowly eased, and he withdrew his palm. All that remained was to pray that his slapdash, desperate attempt to help hadn't impaired the man's cultivation. The man he'd miraculously managed to save remained with his head lowered, still not yet fully conscious. To be honest, Shen Qingchu had already guessed this person's identity, but the system's notification provided absolute confirmation. Congratulations. System notification, the scenario Lu Qingju's death had been changed. The villain Shen Qingchu, grave digging, and hatefulness ratings have decreased. B points plus 200. Yep, called it. This was his Shidi from the same sect. He was also a sucker who had been done in by the original Shen Qingchu. The master of Baizan Bison Peak of Chengchong Mountain, the 12 peaks of Chengchong Mountain's 12 peaks, Luqingji. He was a character who personified badassery. The 12 peaks of Chengchong Mountain each had their own long histories and distinctive characteristics. For example, the head of Chongding Peak coordinated the big picture and oversaw the entire group. Shenqingchu's Qingjing Peak was the favorite of the scholars and young artists. Wanzhong Peak was, with their perfect environment, had produced legions of master swordsmen since time immemorial. There we go. Kuxing Peak's name, ascetic practice, spoke for itself. Even if you wiped Shenqingchu, he still wouldn't want to go. Shanshu Peak, meanwhile, was the drool-worthy heaven. This was because this last peak only accepted female disciples, and historically their disciples were highly attractive. It was therefore filled to the brim with beautiful girls. There had been no shortage of lewd fan work written by perverted readers, blossoming and massed like flowers. Of these, a tyrannical Shanshu fell in love with me, and my days sleeping around on Shanshu Peak had been particularly outstanding, filled with grade school level writing and erotic scenes with no bottom line. The circulation and impact of these fanfics had been enormous, to the point that their popularity compared to that of the original work. But out of all these peaks, the ones youths loved the most, revered the most, and were the wildest about joining, was Lu Qingji's Peak. Lu Qingji's Bison Peak. It was the most warlike of the Chengchong Mountain branches, as well as the branch with the greatest martial ability. Every single generation's Bison Peak Lord was a world-class sword master, a victor of countless battles, an undefeated legend. How hot-blooded, how dashing! Male readers always fervently admired strong characters. Even though Lu Qingji never officially debuted on page, he hadn't lacked for fans, and Shenyang had been especially fascinated with him. In his headcanon, Lu Qingji had been a sharp and manly man, powerful and magnificent, a war god, right? Shen Qingchu looked down at that face, as beautiful as a fine woman's, and his dreams shattered and died, the fantasies he'd always held destroyed. How could the invincible Bison Peak Lord look like his spiritual antithesis? There we go. Spiritual antithesis. This was clearly the face of a charming young master who arranged flowers and plucked farewell willow branches. With this appearance, you've totally betrayed the headcanon of your martial prowess fanatics. Then again, it made sense. Lu Qingji was the older brother of the number one true female lead, the peerless beauty Lu Mingyan. As the protagonist's wife, she absolutely had to be first class from top to bottom. It was just science for her to have such powerful genes. Undefeatable in battle, an arrogant disposition, and an attractive face? With Bingy around, a second character in the same mold was unnecessary. No wonder Great Master Airplane had offed him so early. Not even the protagonist, yet you dare to share those qualities? Of course you'd be either exceptional cannon fodder or dead in seconds. It hadn't occurred to Shen Qingchu in the moment, but as he thought about it now, how might saving this person impact Lu Binghe's satisfaction points? There were a few details on Lu Qingji, but he played a very important role in highlighting the depths of Shen Qingchu's general scumminess. Even though the Lu Shen pair were sect siblings, they didn't get along. This was why Shen Qingchu had tried to flee at first. Already unable to see eye to eye on a normal day, throwing Lu Qingji into a chi deviation was just asking him to either chase down and hack Shen Chu to death, or like the original work, to have Shen Chu sabotage and kill him instead. Though no one knew why their hatred ran so deep, it was a sure fact that the original Shen Chu had been Lu Qingji's murderer. The exposure of this incident was one of the exciting incidents that marked the start of Shen Chu's downfall. The specific line they used to condemn Shen Chu went something like, taking advantage of an opening during another's cultivation, he intervened, driving the man to his death, so this very moment was likely when he'd made his move. The original Shen Chu killed the female's lead only family, so of course Lu Binghe took revenge for his wife. Shen Chu hatefulness quotient was truly extraordinary. While Shen Chu was crouching there worrying over his future, Lu Qingji had finished coughing up blood and finally regained consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Shen Chu sitting before him with a bored expression, looking down his stuck-up nose at him. He definitely didn't look like someone with good intentions. Alarmed, Lu Qingji violently jerked upright, ready to defend himself. The motion jarred his badly injured internal organs, throwing his qi circulation into chaos. Another mouthful of blood sprayed out of him. Shidi, regulate your qi. Don't be so agitated, Shen Chu said coolly. You're the Baizan Peak Lord. How could you let yourself look so wretched? Here, wipe yourself off. He passed Lu Qingji a handkerchief. Lu Qingji coughed up more blood. Shen, what the hell are you planning now? Seeing how much he was suffering, Shen Chu lightly clapped him on the back. Lu Qingji instantly assumed that Shen Chu intended him harm, but he was helpless to avoid the touch. Only after the palm connected did he feel a clear, steady stream of spiritual energy enter and flow through his body, smoothing his cultivation. Lu Qingji was more aghast than he would have been if Shen Chu had stabbed him in the back. After all, he was used to the backstabbing. Shen Chu continued to pat him on his back. Lu Shidi, tell the truth. To tell you the truth, lately Shishong has been in seclusion, and he's come to realize many things, he said earnestly. Seeing you at death's door, a beauty fading, dying so young, it brought back so many memories. Shishong is deeply ashamed and filled with regret. Lu Qingji began to hack up blood even more profusely. From this point on, how about we leave our disagreements behind us and move forward and hand in hand as a pair of model sect siblings, full of the affection due to fellow sect members, Shen Chu suggested, tactfully expressing his goodwill. How do you feel about this, Shidi? Laying his objective out straight was a little shameful, but since he hadn't killed Lu Qingji and had thereby changed the scene and avoided its evil karma, he figured why not go all the way and simply build a good relationship. Maybe Master Lu could even back him up in the future. Lu Qingji's complexion was abnormally poor. He looked Shen Chu in the eyes for a while. Then, as he finally reached the limits of his tolerance, he said, You, go away. Shen Chu nodded in understanding. After all, they'd hated each other for so long. You couldn't farm favor points so soon after a heel turn. He couldn't rush this thing, only take it slow. He went as asked, waving behind him without looking back as he walked away. If Shidi runs into more trouble during training, there's no need to be shy. You can call Shishong for help, since we're so close. We should take care of each other. Lu Qingji looked like he would cough up more blood if Shen Chu had said anything further. His glare was terrifying. Shen Chu wisely shut his mouth and did as he'd been told. Lu Qingji was left alone, and he painfully hacked up another mouthful of blood. They'd always been at odds. Ever since he was young, Lu Qingji had been unable to stand Shen Chu. Both parties had deeply despised each other. It wasn't the type of virtual you'd see when a belligerent but happy couple fought and argued, but the type where one wrong word could escalate into violence, even to the point of trying to kill each other. The fact Shen Chu hadn't kicked him while he was down was inconceivable in itself. but to go so far as to help, even save him? But the reality was right before him. Lo Chingju's face couldn't help twisting. He was unable to remember what had happened after the moment he'd lost control, but now his spiritual circulation was smooth. He couldn't have straightened it himself during his frenzy. He must have had outside assistance. Could Shen Qingju really have helped him? Just thinking about this possibility filled Lu Qingju with revulsion. He would have rather died. Even though the person he'd worked so hard to save was disgusted with him, Shen Qingju was incomparably satisfied. Lu Qingju couldn't have died. Lu Qingju should have died by his hand, but Shen Qingju had saved the man through a series of freak coincidences. If he could befriend Lu Qingju, even if his plan to raise Lu Binghe into a top 10 best disciple didn't succeed, as the master of Baizen Peak, Lu Qingju could at least stand beside him as a fellow sex sibling and help shield him a little later. Although this was a little ulterior, as his own sorry life was on the line, it was no time for moral dilemmas. There was no sense of time within the caves. Shen Qingju felt like he hadn't done anything at all when the day to end his seclusion arrived. Shen Qingju sat cross-legged on a stone platform, eyes shut. He kept them closed until the last wisps of spiritual energy had finished circling through all his limbs and bones. Having intensively cultivated for several months, he could freely control his spiritual energy and had risen one level above his original cultivation base. This told him that he had obtained 100% command over his body, and even the last shreds of discoordination had been annihilated. Both his eyes shone brightly, and his immortal figure now felt distinctly different from how it had been before. Shen Qingju jumped down from the stone platform, his body all the more graceful, as if his four limbs had been instilled with a breeze filled with vigor. Of course, it was possible that this was only his subjective feeling. After all, the days in seclusion had passed so quickly, as if he'd jump ahead in the video's progress bar. If this were a novel and not one padded out like that of Great Master Airplanes, the plot would have been finished in one chapter. Before leaving, he thought he ought to greet his neighbor, and so he knocked on the stone wall. "Shidi, how's your situation over there?" he asked. "Shishon will be leaving first." His voice echoed in the empty cavern. While not loud, it could be clearly heard by a cultivator like Lu Qingju. As expected, he received no response. Shen Qingju didn't mind. It was enough to express his kind of wishes. Possibly. With a sweep of his hem, he exited the caves like a wind whispered beneath his feet, ready to welcome the approaching storm. If he had correctly calculated the time and date, it was about the time for an upcoming story event of critical importance. It could have been considered the first small climax of the early narrative. The demons would arrive, armed and eager to provoke a fight, thereby triggering mass panic. The small climax also included a brief glimpse of two of the book's important female leads, whereupon they start paying attention to Lu Binghe. The Lingxi caves were isolated from the outside world, and the interior of the caves was tranquil, but as soon as Shen Qingju exited them, he found the entirety of Chongding Peak consumed by the fire and smoke of war. Panicked disciples ran every which way, and the alarm bells rang in united clamor. Shen Qingju instantly understood. They'd already appeared. Perfect timing. He arrived at the right moment. As soon as they saw him, several disciples from some peak or another threw themselves at him. Shen Shibo, you finally left seclusion. It's a disaster. Monsters from the demon realm snuck onto Chongding Peak and injured many of our sex siblings. Shen Qingju patted the disciple with each hand. Settle down. Where's Zhang were Songmen Chushong. Songmen Shibo left the mountains on an important business, Disciple A said tearfully. Otherwise, how else could those monstrous demons have used this chance to invade? Those monstrous demons are truly despicable, Disciple B said furiously. Not only did they take advantage of our vulnerability to evade, they also severed the rainbow bridges connecting the 12 peaks and set up some strange barrier. Now, Chongding Peak is completely unable to receive support from the other peaks. Shen Jingchu knew of all this. He was just asking while passing through. As of now, he had gone through cultivation training, and on top of that, had experience with punching Lu Binghe and kicking Lu Qingji. Eep! With a bearing of heroic resolve and reached the heavens, he said, "No need to panic. Our Chengchong Mountain is a majestic, unparalleled sect that has produced countless heroes. We would never fear the dregs of the demon realm." The disciples instantly felt like they'd found a pillar of support, and they followed behind Shen Qingchu like a train. Along the way, the disciples who'd been flailing around like headless chickens also rushed to follow, and the ones who didn't know what was happening followed as well. In the end, the procession kept growing longer and longer until they arrived before Chongding Peak's main hall. Every single member of Chengchong Mountain sect on Chengding Peak had come to encircle and exterminate the demons who had overtaken it deep within. Due to plot requirements, the disciples of Qingjing Peak were all coincidentally at Chongding Peak to greet Shen Qingchu as he left seclusion, and they had been gathered there for a while now. Shen Qingchu first sought out Lu Binghe's figure, and indeed he saw him standing within the group, expression solemn. It had been some time since he had last seen the boy. He'd grown taller by a fair amount, his youthful figure like a graceful, elongating stalk of bamboo. Although, with that handsome little face, he drew a great deal of attention. Having confirmed that the protagonist was at the scene, Shen Qingchu's heart settled, and he turned his focus to the enemy. Before the elegant, magnificent Chongding Hall stood more than 100 unknown individuals rolling with demonic qi. The leader of this invasion was in fact a young girl who appeared to be no more than 15 or 16. Shen Jingchu's heart thumped with excitement. She's appeared? She's finally appeared! Demons loved exotic and unusual dress, but even among them, this girl's fashion sense was exceptionally unorthodox. Her jet black head of hair had been combed into many smaller braids. Her complexion was fair, her eye makeup bold, her lips abnormally scarlet. Although she was young, it was self-evident that she would grow into a woman of overwhelming, glamorous bearing. It was a hot day. She had dressed lightly, and having essentially only wrapped herself in several bolts of gauzy red cloth. Her wrists and ankles were decorated with silver bangles, the tiny bells on every limb jingling with her slightest movement. Her bare snow-white feet directly touched the ground. Shen Qingchu couldn't help but side-eyeing them a couple of times. His thoughts weren't indecent, but rather, "You've traveled thousands of miles from the demon realm, crossing land and sea, and after arriving you even climbed on this tall mountain barefoot? Young miss, do your feet really not hurt?" Wait, that was not the point. The point was that this was one of the most popular female leads in the novel of Proud Immortal Demon Wei. Demon Saintess Sha Hualing. Sha Hualing was a pure-blooded demon, vicious and merciless, crafty and proud. Yet she was madly in love with Lu Binghe. After getting involved with Lu Binghe, not only did she kill for him, she even dared to commit an offense as monstrously treasonous as betraying the demon race. Though these days a good number of people often denounce this trope of brainless, lovesick girl, there was nothing you could do. Even a large number of male readers loved it. A pity that a girl this spicy could only be enjoyed by the male lead. Shen Qingchu couldn't help but glance at Lu Binghe. At the same time, Lu Binghe inadvertently swept his gaze about as well. Their two gazes met, and they both startled. Lu Binghe seemed about to speak, but he said nothing. Shen Qingchu nodded at him. The rainbow bridges had been severed. Of the various peak lords, the ones sleeping still slept. The ones in seclusion remained in seclusion. The ones strolling kept strolling, and the ones away on official business did not return. The arrival of Shen Qingchu, a member of the older generation, was such powerfully reassuring. The disciples regained confidence. Ming Fen was the first to yell, "Demoness, my master is here. Let's see if you'll dare be so arrogant now." More and more people joined the gathered crowd. Several hundred disciples in uniformly colored robes and furious expressions surrounded the invaders, trapping them in the space before the hall. Several demons tried to use the chance to break through. Perfect training targets for Chen Qingchu. He casually grabbed them, lifted them up, and then threw them back to land at Sha Hualing's feet. Sha Hualing had always been clever and resourceful. Her earlier arrogance had derived from the fact that, having long enjoyed being the number one sect, Chengchong Mountain's defenses were lax and loose. She had also seen Yu Qingyuan depart on official business, leaving Chongding Peak without one of its senior members to guard it. Sensing that things had taken a turn, she changed her tune. "My people didn't climb this mountain for the sake of a battle. It's just that we've long heard that Chengchong Mountain produced many talented individuals. We were curious. We wanted to ascend the mountain for a look, as well as to spar and learn from you." "How kind of you," Shen Qingchu flapped his fan. "But if you've come to spar, why do you do so when the sect leader is away? Why sever the rainbow bridges, and why injure so many of our sect disciples? I've never seen this method of sparring." Sha Hualing bit her lip, utilizing that weapon exclusive to young girls. She twirled a stray lock of hair dangling beside her cheek around her finger. "This must be the renowned Shuya sword, Senior Shen Qingchu," she said, drawing out each word. As expected, hearsay can't compare to seeing the real person. Linger is young and unable to manage her subordinates. If we have offended you or caused misunderstandings, we beg the immortal master to be magnanimous and forgiving. No matter how softly she spoke, Shen Qingchu wouldn't be moved the slightest bit. The truth of the situation was clearer to him than anyone else. To lay it out plain, this trouble had begun when Sha Hualing was granted the title of Demon Saintess, which had just happened. Being proud and arrogant, she had an exaggerated opinion of her own abilities. She had intended to slaughter the entirety of Chengchong Mountain's first peak in one go, then seize the nameplate hanging over Chongding Peak as a war trophy and bring it back as proof of her achievement. At the same time, her exploit would be a demonstration of force directed at the human realm. "Then, what is the young Miss's conclusion now?" asked Shen Qingchu. Sha Hualing pursed her lips in a smile. "Though right now my people are at a disadvantage, that's only because your sect has such great numbers. Linger is unable to discern who between us would be the victor." "Oh? Then what would you need to do so?" Shen Qingchu asked, putting on the air of an elder as smoothly as a fish took it to water. Parting her red lips, Sha Hualing elegantly suggested a method that seemed fair and just. "Why don't we just choose 3 representatives and hold 3 matches?" This suggestion was solid. For many years, the human and demon realms had maintained an uneasy balance and had yet to drop the pretense of peace. Eliminating Sha Hualing and her mob wouldn't be impossible, but it would likely light a fuse. The demons definitely wouldn't let her death go unanswered, and it wouldn't be worth it if they stirred up even a greater conflict. On the other hand, simply letting them go would also generate trouble. They couldn't allow outsiders to come and go as they pleased from Chongding Peak. By setting conditions and holding some matches, each teaching the other party a lesson or two, both parties could back down and save face. It would be the best way to handle this. Since this was the first small climax in the original work, Shen Qingchu still remembered it fairly clearly. The first match was Shen Cheng-chu versus the Demon Elder Single-Arm Doobie. To highlight Shen Cheng-chu's scummy nature, he of course used despicable and underhanded means to achieve victory. By comparison, Lo Binghe's honorable and upright actions in the third match illustrated a strong contrast for the readers. Now, however, Shen Cheng-chu wasn't about to so pointlessly tarnish his image. Elder Single Arm's entire body was a dark purple color, and he was tactrum in recent. At Sha Hualing's command, he walked towards a stretch of open ground. The sect disciples cheered and shouted for the Shen Shibo. Shen Cheng-chu knew the extent of this elder's single-arm strength. "You only have one arm," he said, smiling. "Even if I defeat you like this, it'd be due to an unfair advantage." "Oh," Sha Hualing said from behind her back. "Actually, Linger has a solution. How about you also cut off one of your arms? That way there won't be any unfair advantage anymore." Angry protests rose around them. Unconcerned, Shen Cheng-chu smiled slightly and slowly spread his fan. "How about this? I won't use a single hand." These words threw the crowd into an uproar. Among them, Lo Binghe also stood shocked. "Wouldn't use a single hand?" Sha Hualing snorted. That is the worst way I've ever said snorted, I think. Sha Hualing snorted, thinking Shen Cheng-chu was being full of himself, but she was also secretly filled with endless glee. If her side could win a match so easily, why wouldn't they go for it? "Since Senior Shen is so ready, let us start," she said hurriedly. A number of bystanders realized that this girl was actually quite brazen. Though her manner was pure and innocent, her words were vicious and sinister, and she rushed to take advantage of others. As a reader enjoying the drama, Shen Cheng-chu had always come away with one impression, but experiencing the situation for himself, he came away with another. He'd never really been charmed by Sha Hualing's way of dealing with things, but between her youth and her daintiness, he had at least been able to force himself to regard her behavior as cute lowly willfulness. Until now. Under all those gazes, Shen Cheng-chu stayed true to his word and didn't draw his sword. Instead, he played with the fan in his hand, smiling at Elder Single Arm. Elder Single Arm only had one arm, but that didn't slightly hinder his ability to swing his beheading saber. But his savage swing didn't actually hit its target. He whipped around to find Shen Cheng-chu was already standing behind him, still smiling. In truth, Shen Cheng-chu's face was getting sore. However, Shuya had already left its sheath. Shen Cheng-chu hadn't directly touched his sword at all. His left hand had subtly formed a sword seal, commanding Shuya to fly and turn over, brandishing itself. Elder Single Arm's eyes were struck with pain from the flashes of the sword's snow-white gleam. He rushed to lift his saber and attack again. Saber and sword clashed in succession of incessant ringing clangs while sparks sprayed and danced. The crowd was unable to tear their eyes away. In reality, this was just a competition, but anyone would call it both captivating and captivating. Those are the same two words, but one's just italicized. The first captivating encompassed the impressiveness of the fight, where the use of real weapons made it a matter of life and death. But what made it captivating were the magnificent visual effects, especially Shen Cheng-chu, who moved with such skill and ease in his pure and scholarly way. Surrounded by the glint and flashes of blades, on top of this, he continued to gracefully and leisurely fan himself with his paper fan. It was as if in any instant he would compose a poem with 7 steps. Like a figure of legend. There's a little footnote. According to legend, the emperor demanded that the poet Chaozi compose a poem with 7 steps to prove he was innocent of treason. Describes extraordinary literature talent. So, such utterly breathtaking style. No, achieving this level of badass was far too perfect. As Lo Binghe watched, his heart practically galloped and his soul trembled. He'd known Shen Cheng-chu was incredible, but he never anticipated that he was this incredible. So strong. Surrounded by the cheers of sect disciples, Shen Qingchu attained a complete victory in the first match. At this moment, Shen Qingchu realized why the original flavor had clung to being a poser like it was his lifeline. It was unbelievably satisfying. The disciples gazed from a sea of sparkling stars. What an inspiring experience when Shen Qingchu was certain now. A scum villain could also gain great reputation points. At the same time, the system also gave him good news. Demonic invasion of the Immortals Mountain. First match of the competition, Shen Qingchu's victory. Martial skills rating, up 50. B points, up 50. Shen Qingchu, pleased smile didn't last long. The system's next notification came like a slap to the face. System alert. If Lu Binghe does not participate in the competition, 1,000 points will be deducted from the protagonist's satisfaction points. What? Completely unprepared, Shen Qingchu turned pale with shock. He'd been laboring to earn satisfaction points, huffing and puffing like an old ox dragging a broken cart, and only managed to earn somewhere in the 300s. And in an instant, he'd risk losing 1,000? System, are you trying to get people killed? This competition was an important part of the plot. At the same time, it also served as a small, early-stage climax that debuted two female leads and pitted their splendor against each other, and the consequences of it later enabled the protagonist to get an underling and also allowed him to learn secret techniques. All important things. If Lu Binghe didn't make it on stage this time, he would miss the limelight and be unable to grab everyone's attention. Hence, negative 1,000 satisfaction points. But if Shen Qingchu named him a sect representative and sent him out to fight, what would he be doing? The original flavor pushed Lu Binghe onto the battlefield because he was shameless. He didn't care about the sect's reputation. He hated Lu Binghe to the bone, though enough to want to vicariously torture him via the hands of demons. The current Shen Qingchu didn't share any of those three motives. At the end of everything, why was someone else responsible for the oh so mighty protagonist's satisfaction points? Shen Qingchu was still angrily rebuking the system for its unscientific approach when the time came for the start of the second match. Sha Hualing had been afraid that Shen Qingchu would fight all three matches himself and swiftly said, "If the same representative competes in all three matches, we would lose the chance to truly learn from each other. I will be my people's representative for the second match." No doubt, Sha Hualing had entered first because she believed in her own strengths, but she also likely thought Shen Qingchu wouldn't use his senior position to bully a girl who was his junior. Shen Qingchu didn't want to concern himself with her thoughts at all, and demonstrated as much. Even if he'd originally had the ambition to fight all three matches to earn martial ability points and reputation, the system's notification had extinguished those hopes. However, the second match did have an impressive attention-worthy highlight. "You've all heard her," said Shen Qingchu. "Who's willing to bear this heavy duty?" Even though he was asking all disciples of the sect, his gaze fell on a certain pocket of the crowd. Within that pocket stood a collection of graceful female disciples. Without a doubt, they belonged to Shanshu Peak. In this group of pretty girls, each fairer, more beautiful and more refined than the last, one stood out, a veil draped over her face. Immediately after Shen Qingchu asked this question, she slowly stepped forward from the crowd. Despite himself, a burst of excitement fluttered in Shen Qingchu. "It's here! It's almost here! The two biggest female leads in this book! Their first 1v1! Lu Mingyan was a great beauty. A heaven and earth shattering great beauty at the sight of whom both gods and ghosts would weep. Even though she belonged to Shangshu Peak, which had produced generations of beautiful women since ancient times, she was still a crane among chickens, rising above and beyond them. Her older brother was Baizan's Peak's master, but because she was younger, she'd entered the sect later and become a disciple of Shanshu Peak's next generation. Because her face was excessively beautiful, capable of stealing souls, capable of stealing souls, she had to hide it behind a veil all year round, rendering her unto a flower on a high cliff, unattainable and out of reach. In brief, for the purpose of describing this character's appearance, Master Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky had probably used every single flattering vocabulary word and idiom he'd learned from elementary school to high school. He must have had it hard. Shen Qingchu was very fond of this female lead, and it wasn't only because Luo Mingyan's beauty points were the highest, it was also because she had great poise. She always understood the big picture and grasped the general situation, and her conduct was fair and honest. Even in Luo Binghe's gigantic harem, a wife with both intelligence and moral character was rare. There was one more appeal factor. Luo Mingyan was the only female character for whom Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky didn't write detailed sex scenes. Many readers had been highly dissatisfied with this arrangement, to the point that they spammed the comments with their rantings. But this had given Luo Mingyan something no other female character had, an image as clear as ice and pure as jade. Can't be helped, the unattainable ones are always the best. This was what made the second match worth watching. An evil diviness naturally demanded a righteous saintess as a rival. Every man dreamed of being caught between an angel and a devil, to watch them jealously vie with each other over him one moment, then risk life and limb for his sake in the next. That was the highest, most sacred, perverted fantasy of every male organism. He could get drunk off the wild, untamed charm of the wicked seductress, and at the same time his heart would ache for the austere taste of the pure saintess, who kept pulling him closer only to push him away. One had to admit, Great Master Airplane was genuinely good at nailing what people found satisfying. Shen Qingchu couldn't help giving Luo Binghe another glance. Luo Binghe found it very hard not to care about that gaze. Why exactly did Shen Qingchu keep looking at him? Was it possible that Shizun really had an interest in him? What a pity that under Great Master Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky's pen, battles between female characters usually lacked any standout moments other than ripping beep up for the male gaze. No, actually, if Shen Qingchu thought about it, as written by the Great Master, none of the battles had any memorable moments. It was always the same tired phrases like light, like a lightning flash, colorful as a rainbow, sword glares of every color, horrifying as a monster, etc. Several incensed times later, Luo Mingyan lost. After all, at this time, she hadn't yet gone to Wanjian Peak to claim her personal sword. Even though she did her utmost, her weapon was only a slender, ordinary blade, while Sha Hualing was already a demon saintess, with saintly weapons in ready supply at her beck and call. Naturally, there was a gap between their abilities. Luo Mingyan approached Shen Qingchu. This disciple has lost. For failing the mission, I request Shen Shibo's punishment. When no one else would come forward, you assumed the responsibility, said Shen Qingchu. This fight would never have been easy. Whether you attained victory or suffered defeat, both were acceptable outcomes. You need not be concerned. You need only to take back the victory in the future. Having taken the second round, Sha Hualing's face was glowing, and she laughed delicately. This last match will decide the overall victor. I wonder who Senior Shen will send out. This time you must choose carefully. Shen Qingchu stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The young miss need not worry, he said with profound air. This one has long since decided on a representative and can guarantee that no matter if he wins or loses, he will become your life's bane. Sha Hualing took these words as merely his attempt at intimidation. She clapped her hands. Which brave warrior will take the third match? From the crowd of demons, a giant elder slowly walked out. He was giant because he really was unfairly tall. Definitely more than 3 meters, wouldn't you say? Built like a bear, he had a head of disheveled hair and armor that covered him from head to toe with spikes. He dragged a giant iron hammer behind him. Shen Qingchu was positive that the ground quaked lightly with every step he took. First, to give you all a warning, the spikes on Elder Skyhammer Tianchu's armor are coaxed with a highly toxic poison. Sha Hualing said gleefully. This poison is ineffective against demons, but if it enters a human body, there is no cure. The first thought Shen Qingchu had was, shit. Great Master, airplane shooting towards the sky, don't just name things whatever without thinking, calling the one with only one arm, Elder One Arm. Dubai, then calling the one whose weapon was a giant hammer, Elder Sky Hammer, Tianchu. Aren't you afraid of naming things properly? Meanwhile, Shua Hualing's words had triggered a wave of rage in the onlookers. Piece of shit, demoness. If you want to compete, then compete. How can you say it's fair to use poison? I didn't conceal the information, did I? Sha Hualing retorted. If you think it's unfair or are afraid of losing your life, then forfeit the match and admit defeat. Then you won't need to compare anymore. We demons won't mock you. It's human nature to value your lives, but my people value glory over anything else. Between the demons' roaring and laughter, the disciples' cries of condemnation, Shen Qingchu rubbed the crease between his brows and silently sighed. From the reader's perspective, where you could live in the fantasy of being the protagonist, of course you'd love a woman like Sha Hualing and find her satisfying, but once you were a person facing off with her in reality, he couldn't believe anyone could bring themselves to like her. It wasn't that she was different from how she had been described in the story. In fact, the problem was she was exactly as advertised. Cruel and vicious, combined with an infatuation that made her throw her brain away. If you weren't the protagonist, you'd better run the hell away. The moment you threatened her or Lo Binghe's interest even in the tiniest bit, she'd want your life. She wouldn't even think of alternatives like chopping your hands or feet or gouging out your eyes. Even if you were her father, you'd have to be careful. In the original work, to help Lo Binghe gain standing in the demon realm, she backstabbed the guy. Shen Qingchu remained unflappable as in the face of Shua Hualing's provocations. He maintained his silence for a stretch, using the time to stare intently at the crowd of demons. Only in the end did he turn, fixing his gaze on a certain person's direction. Lo Binghe, come here. Qingjing Peak's disciples fell into an uproar. The disciples from the other branches were calmer, and they weren't familiar with Qingjing Peak's internal politics. They even thought that Shen Qingchu had certainly selected a disciple he was proud of, an unparalleled talent. That was the only way they could hope to best this demon elder, who appeared to be in his hundreds. It was strange that they'd never heard of this person, and he seemed rather young. Was it possible that Qingjing Peak's disciples weren't yet aware of Lo Binghe's true abilities? Ming Fan's face had gone white. Shizun, he stammered. To send out this little Shidi, isn't it unbefitting? Oh, said Shen Qingchu. Then will you go? Ming Fan repeatedly shook his head. Even though he didn't want to offer himself, he would be happy to see Lo Binghe beat into a pulp. This matter concerned their sex honor, and to let themselves be invaded and a Peak's nameplate taken, and to set themselves up to lose this competition, Chengchong Mountain would lose fate, and Qingjing Peak would lose a massive amount of fates. Ning Yingying was even more anxious, to the point that she teared up. She defiantly grabbed Lo Binghe's arm while stomping and yelled, "No, no, no!" Lo Binghe had no real battle experience, and if he had to face a demon elder covered from head to toe with spikes and poison, carrying a hammer that weighed at least several hundred kilograms, he'd definitely be beaten to death. You lot think I want him to enter? I was also forced into this. I have no choice. Even so, Shen Qingchu stated, I said he'll be our representative, so he will be. Are you unsatisfied with this master's decision? Yingying let go of him. Ning Yingying saw the stony look on her master's face and knew that there was nothing she could do. Lo Binghe patted her soothingly. Don't worry, Shiji. He spoke in a steady voice even though his face was dark white. I may be untalented, but if Shizun has chosen me, I will spare no effort. Even if I must stake my life, I won't lose face for the sect. Ning Yingying rubbed away her tears and let go of Lo Binghe's arm. As if she couldn't stand to stay there and watch her crush take a beating, she stomped her feet several times and ran off whimpering. Shen Qingchu was overjoyed. Good! Run! If she ran, then the trouble she was supposed to make after this drama wouldn't crop up. The crowd saw that although the youth who had approached was upright and honorable in body and spirit, with good potential and foundation, he was clearly a young disciple with shallow cultivation. In contrast, the demon representative, Elder Skyhammer, loomed with his bear-like build. Compared to Lobingha's still developing figure, he radiated an oppressive aura, his entire body emanating dark chi, dark, rolling demonic chi. Everyone felt hesitation. Some hypothesized that perhaps Lobingha was hiding his strength, but when the fight actually started, they were rendered speechless. Hiding his strength? No, this kid really wouldn't be able to take that guy down. This wasn't a match. This was a one-sided beatdown. From the moment Lobingha stepped forward, he essentially had no chance to strike. The demon elder's strength was incomparable. His swings filled with the vigor of a tiger. Even though Lobingha did his best to dodge and search for an opening to attack, from time to time the hammer still managed to smash into him. Not only were Chung Chong Mountain's disciples dumbstruck, but the demons were also at a loss for words. This was too horrible. Isn't this outcome predetermined? Someone murmured. What's the point of continuing with the match? Elder Large Hammer. Ah, no, Elder Sky Hammer laughed skyward and sounded like a great bell. Well said, this child should hurry up and admit defeat. Then this elder can still spare his life. He will win, Chen Qingchu said lightly. Bullshit. Lobingha was the overpowered protagonist. Of course he was going to win. It was only that the path to victory would be difficult. Shen Qingchu's voice was neither loud nor soft, but it had just enough volume to carry to the center of the match area. Lobingha had directly taken multiple heavy blows, and he was holding back several mouthfuls of blood. With those confident words entered his ears, he somehow managed to swallow it down. He would win? Shizen had called on him to enter because he really thought Lobingha would win? The horde of demons laughed and jeered. They shouted at Lobingha to hurry up and admit defeat. Yet Lobingha did not heed their wishes. Even as he took several more blows in a row, he became more and more poised, turning a deaf ear to the jeers and shouts from the crowds. His steps became lighter and more graceful. Soon, 9 times out of 10, Elder Skyhammer's giant weapon couldn't so much as brush him. The only places on Elder Skyhammer's body that weren't covered with spikes were his face and fists. This wasn't actually good news. It doubtless meant that the elder had extensively trained these 2 places so that they wouldn't be vulnerable even without the protection of the poisonous spikes. At the same time, this was also very likely the only breach in his defense. Lobingha slowed his breathing and attentively studied his opponent. On the surface, it had seemed that Shizen had chosen Lobingha only to make things difficult for him. However, if Lobingha lost this round, not only would he lose face, but the entire sect would lose as well. And furthermore, as the one who had chosen to put him forward, Shen Qingchu would be especially at fault. That meant that Shizen would only have chosen Lobingha for this match if he really did firmly believe he could win. Thus did student Lobingha's colorful imagination successfully activate the massive fog of misunderstanding system. No one had ever believed in him like this. If only because he'd been entrusted with something so vitally important, he absolutely had to win and make everyone else see. Once again, this huge hammer came whistling towards him. Lobingha's pupil shrank and gathered energy within his palms. He condensed his chi into an attack. The audience had been enthralled by this youth who kept persevering without hesitation. Though Lobingha had no opportunities to counterattack, he never gave up looking for a chance to do so, and he furthermore refused to admit defeat. At this instant, when the chance to counterattack finally came, Lobingha seized it with incomparable precision. The deadlock had lasted for nearly an hour, but the third match finally came to an end. Other than Chen Qingchu, no one had anticipated this conclusion. Elder Skyhammer, who was covered from head to toe in poisonous spikes and boasted 100 years' worth of skill, had been defeated by a youth of 15 years. Sure enough, Lu Mingyan and Sha Hualing were drawn to Lobingha. 2 pairs of beautiful eyes fixed neatly upon him, gazing at Lo Binghe's form and unwilling to divert their attention. Captured Lo Mingyan and Sha Hualing's interest, became famous in a fight during the battle with the demons who invaded Changchong Mountain Sect. Protagonist satisfaction points 500. Shen Qingchu was furious. How dare you? The deduction would have been 1,000, but the profit was only 500? Black-hearted system, double standards holding dog. However, it was fine because now everyone was thinking the same thing. Though young, Lo Binghe was truly worthy of respect. Shen Qingchu truly had inscrutable depths. Sha Hualing held herself back for a long while, then finally squeezed out her concession. Changchong Mountain is certainly full of talent and has produced generations of young heroes. Linger is indeed impressed. Well said, said Shen Qingchu. Since we have our results, could the young miss withdraw with her people? Please excuse us for being such a mess right now. We're unable to continue entertaining our guests from far away. The meaning hidden within his words, well, it wasn't hidden. This was a direct command telling them to get out. Sha Hualing was filled with anger, but there was nowhere for it to go. Her fingers clenched in the gauzy red clothes on her body for a moment, then she suddenly exploded. She reached out and gave Elder Skyhammer a fast, violent slap. To face Senior Yen's young disciple, and yet lose so badly, her sweet voice said angrily. You lost every last bit of face for the demon race. Elder Skyhammer was also pitiable. Hierarchy within the demon race was strict, and Sha Hualing was a saintess of noble birth. He took the slap and could only grovel. He dared not fight back, only saying again and again, Your subordinate is incompetent and begs the saintess for punishment. Shen Qingchu couldn't stand watching anymore. Miss Sha, if you wish to discipline your subordinates, please do so somewhere else. Chongding Peak is not a place for the nobility to throw their weight around. With that slap, Sha Hualing had vented her anger, finally releasing some of her resentment. She turned back, full of smiles. It is as you say, Senior Chen. It was just when Linger saw the incredible young talent you fostered, then looked at the trash under her, her heart was filled with disappointment, so she lost control for a moment. I beg you not to laugh. She then turned facing Elder Skyhammer with the expression of a wicked stepmother, one as cold as a refrigerator. For Elder's single arm to lose to Senior Shen in their match was a matter of course, yet you also lost your match. There was no need for me to say anything. Figure out what to do yourself. As what she meant by this, Elder Skyhammer clearly understood. His heart chilled on the spot. When they arrived, he thought that other than Shen Qingchu, the people of Chongding Peak were a bunch of half-grown children, disciples with shallow cultivation. Hence, he wanted to take advantage of easy pickings to earn favor before the new saintess. He never thought that he'd fail so terribly instead, to the point that he'd lose his life. He looked up and saw Lo Binghe surrounded by the crowd, all asking concerningly about his well-being. Malice surged through him. He didn't dare touch Shen Qingchu, but this child who'd brought him so much misfortune, he absolutely had to take his fair share of the blame, to drag him to death as well. Shen Qingchu had been paying close attention to the demon's every movement and expressions. He didn't miss the flash of nefarious intent in Elder Skyhammer's eyes, but demons were truly a bold race, taking action immediately and without even the slightest bit of buffering time. Only a second after coming up with the idea, Elder Skyhammer canered forward, swinging his weapon. Elder Skyhammer's body was large and tall, and he quickly closed the distance, like a mountain of metal hurtling toward Lo Binghe. Lo Binghe's injuries weren't light, and so his movements were sluggish. He would certainly be hit, yet Shen Qingchu let out a cold humph, and in a flash his figure suddenly appeared in the Elder Skyhammer's path. With the tip of his fan, he tapped the bend of Elder Skyhammer's knee. Elder Skyhammer collapsed on the spot. He really collapsed. His entire body crashed to the ground, unconscious. As for that giant hammer, Shen Qingchu casually scooped it up and held it in his hand, weighing it. As expected, it was a tad hefty. However, given the elegant quality of his image, holding a giant hammer wasn't very aesthetic, so Shen Qingchu immediately hurled it to the horde of demons. With a muffled thud, the head of the hammer slammed into the ground. The display was significantly shocking, and his intimidating air became even more terrifying. Shen Qingchu's smile didn't reach his eyes. You wanted to kill him? The disciple under my tutelage are not yours to bully. When he spoke these words with awe-inspiring righteousness, not only were the demons at a loss for words, Shen Qingchu himself felt that his inner face reddened slightly. Immortal Master, weren't you the one who sent your disciple out to be abused by others? Lo Binghe stared at the teal-clothed back before him. Having forgotten to even say thanks, he only knew that his master had saved him yet again. Shizun was always like this. He could seem to be harsh on Lo Binghe, yet when it came down to the critical moment, he always stood before his student. Shen Qingchu threw a glance behind him. Are you all right? Gonna shamelessly try to farm some more favor points. This disciple is fine, Lo Binghe said in a rush. Many thanks to Shizun for the assistance. This child is so foolishly sweet. Shen Qingchu's inner face grew even redder, and he quickly turned back to Sha Hualing. Miss Sha, you need to properly discipline your subordinates. If you can't stand losing, why set yourself up for the potential of it with these 3 matches? Sha Hualing hadn't predicted Elder Skyhammer's attack and was slightly embarrassed. She was about to say a couple of prefatory words appropriate for an apology, when in that instant something happened that no one could have predicted. Elder Skyhammer, who had been lying motionless on the ground, suddenly leapt and hurled himself at Lo Binghe a second time. Shen Qingchu had already taken his hammer. Did he intend to use his body to crush Lo Binghe? But as Shen Qingchu took an Elder Skyhammer's open arms in his pose that it seemed like he was about to embrace Lo Binghe, his thoughts suddenly made several lightning-like turns, and his entire body broke out in cold sweat. Fuck me, he's still wearing the poison spike armor! In that instant, Shen Qingchu completely forgot about Lo Binghe's plot armor. At that moment of truth, subconsciously, he once again moved to protect his student. Shuya left its blade flashing bright as snow, and pierced Elder Skyhammer's hulking body. But the demon had an entire body's worth of brute force and an all-out effort within him, and he didn't even back down when this skewered. Instead, he seemed overjoyed, relentlessly cantering forward, forcing Shuya to run clean through him and out his back, and his face stretched into a sinister grin. And then he threw himself at Shen Qingchu. Shen Qingchu swiftly made his decision. He promptly withdrew his attack, but it was already too late. From his right arm came stabs of pain, and his heart chilled down to its depths. Skyhammer collapsed to the ground, spat out a mouthful of blood, and laughed madly. Shen Qingchu, I've taken you down with me. Worth it, it was worth it. Shizun! Lo Binghe grabbed Shen Qingchu's right hand. You've been pierced! Shen Qingchu wrenched his hand free. Nothing's wrong. I wasn't pierced. Don't listen to the ravings of a blowhard. As he spoke, he glanced down. His heart was once again blotted out by frantic scream of fuck, 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 fuck. From the back of his hand to his forearm were rows and rows of tiny pinholes. They were already turning red. Luckily, he didn't have tryphobia. However, once Lo Binghe saw his arm, his face went completely white. No one could hear the raging waves in Shen Qingchu's heart. Motherfucker, how many times has the male lead screwed you over? You were already told that he wouldn't die, remember? He won't die. Why did you go out of your way to rescue him? Fuck! Elder Skyhammer finally dragged someone down with him, and it was a heavyweight. This elder has never spoken only to scare, he said, gleefully, no longer even a bit depressed. If I say this poison has no cure, then it has no cure. Peak Lord Shen, sit back and await your death. A blade flashed, and Lo Binghe pulled out Shuya and held it to the demon's throat, his movements so matchlessly agile that Shen Qingchu nearly missed him. It seemed suddenly as if Lo Binghe were another person. Your people must have a cure, he said coldly. If you don't hand it over the antidote, I'll definitely kill you first. Young master, Elder Skyhammer truly isn't lying, Sha Hualing interrupted. This poison is called without a cure. When it comes to humans, it indeed has no cure. The elder has lost his match and done something truly disgraceful. He knows only death awaits for him. Why would he fear your threat? Without a cure? Never had a less effort been put into naming a poison. Even though Shen Qingzhu had read the original work and had long known about this rare poison, he couldn't help lampshading and ranting as the pragmatism of Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky naming sense. Sha Hualing's eyes flashed. The sudden twist in circumstances had clearly inspired her to resume scheming something malicious. Shen Qingzhu nursed no illusions about her character. He circulated his spiritual energy to suppress the continuation wave of pain, and twitching his right arm while his lips curved in a smile, purposely putting on a mask of effortlessness. Your words aren't wrong, but has Miss Shaw forgotten that I've already cultivated for many years? Having achieved mid-core formation stage, can I still be considered a common person? Xia Hualing's expressions tightened. However, it quickly settled again, and she laughed delicately. Whether you are common or not, I do not know, but I do know a method by which we can determine whether Senior Shen had been successfully poisoned. When a person is affected without a cure, starting from their womb, their spiritual flow becomes disconnected. This schism slowly spreads to the entire body. In the end, not only does their spiritual chi congulate and stagnate, so does their blood. I asked Senior Shen to unleash a spiritual blast with his right hand, then we will understand. A spiritual blast, as the name implied, involves amassing a large amount of spiritual energy into a single point, then letting it violently explode, using waves of spiritual energies, powerful osculation as an attack. The effect was similar to pulling a trigger and firing a bullet or hurling a detonator. It seemed that, in reality, the impact depended on the cultivation of the user. Shen Qingzhu had attempted it privately himself and had been able to achieve the effect equivalent to throwing a grenade. But now his right arm was akin to an intricate robot whose parts had short-circuited. He nevertheless exerted himself, but his spiritual flow had been completely cut off. God damn it. He couldn't have been crippled just like that, right? Upon hearing the description of without a cure, Lobingha's lips trembled. In this moment, all the wrongs Shen Qingzhu had committed against him in the past were wiped clean from his heart. The only thing he knew with absolute clarity was that the demons had harmed his teacher to the point that he might be crippled. He might even lose his life, and it was all because of him. Shen Qingzhu saw Lobingha's expression fluctuate, and he nonchalantly patted his student's head. No need to worry. Then Shen Qingzhu lifted his eyes, smiling slightly. There's no harm in trying. Only I can do this without some recompense. Miss Shaw, today you ran amok on Chongding Peak, and this one has put up with it thus far. Now I've changed my mind. I can't let you come and go as you please. If I do, then won't Chongchong Mountain Sect be a laughingstock? How about we exchange a single palm strike under the contract of life and death? No matter who is injured and how, we all bear the blame ourselves. Whatever the result, we must accept it completely. Well, he couldn't show weakness now. All of Chongding Peak was depending on him, and the only available member of the older generation to support them. Xia Hualing wouldn't be too merciless to pass up the opportunity if he fell. Best case scenario, the demons would destroy Chongding Peak, Chongding Hall, then carry its nameplate and mountain gates back to the demon realm, and thereafter their sect's reputation would plummet. Worst case scenario, it would be a massacre. He had no doubts that this woman was entirely capable of doing something like that. Better by far to take a desperate risk and make this one last gamble. He could totally take her out too. Shen Qingzhu hadn't noticed that, unconsciously, he had no longer considered the disciples around him, whether they were anxious, resolute, furious, or indecisive, to be mob characters the novel had described in a scant number of words. Xia Hualing bit her lip, incredibly torn. If Shen Qingzhu hadn't really been poisoned, this exchange of blows would directly pit their spiritual strengths against each other, and she would definitely be killed. But if he was only bluffing and she missed this chance to wipe out Chongding Peak, wouldn't she regret it for the rest of her life? Shen Qingzhu calmly regarded her. His expression was neither that of anticipation nor avoidance as he awaited her decision. Lo Binghe tugged on his sleeve. Shizun, this disciple is willing to take Shizun's place and receive this strike. Shen Qingchu yanked his sleeve back, expression unchanging. In what universe is it acceptable for a master to cower behind his own disciple? Shizun was injured for this disciple's sake. Shen Qingchu glared at him. Since you know it was for your sake, then put some effort into protecting your life. Lo Binghe's heart suffered a heavy blow. He was unable to speak, but the rims of his eyes reddened. At last, Sha Hualing gritted her teeth. Then, Senior Shen, please forgive Linger's rudeness. Come, show no mercy, and let fate decide who lives or dies, Shen Qingchu replied. Sha Hualing's heart thundered in her chest, and she didn't dare respond. Her fire-red figure rose with a leap as she charged forth, her snow-white jade-like palm billowing with potent black demonic chi. Shen Qingchu kicked Lo Binghe aside. Having made his preparations, with one strike he'd ensured that there was no winners. However, he was not sent flying by Sha Hualing's palm strike, nor did he cough up fresh blood as his body self-destructed and killed him. Roiling with killing intent, the master of Baizan Peak, whose sword had already left its sheath, without even lifting a single finger and using only the spiritual energy bursting forth from his body, blasted away Sha Hualing even as she was attacking with her full strength. After a short silence, Chongding Peak boiled over. Lu Shishu left seclusion! The Baizan Peak war god had left seclusion. You demons, let's see if you can still be arrogant now. The cheering were greater than the total amount of badass poser points Shen Qingchu had painstakingly farmed up until now. A rain of tears showered down on Shen Qingchu's heart. You damn show-off, would it kill you to arrive sooner? How about you leave some badass points for me? Next, this world proved itself to be truly that of a fan-service-packed stallion novel. After Sha Hualing was blasted away, she let out a single delicate scream, and the gauzy red cloth draped over her body, that had barely covered anything in the first place, also tore to shreds, elicting a series of alarmed cries from the onlookers. She cushioned her landing with a beautifully executioned roll, propelling herself into a standing in a single movement. Demons were indeed bold and unrestrained. Even though her entire body was censored out, Sha Hualing wasn't ashamed in the slightest. She spitefully tore off the cloak of a subordinate beside her, carelessly throwing it over herself. I underestimated you today, she said, but we will definitely meet again in the future. Let's go. Lu Qingji sneered. Coming and going as you please, how shameless. Dream on. His posture shifted and his sword, Chengluan, soared into the sky, summoning sword glares by the hundreds and thousands which arranged themselves into a glowing array before stabbing downward, descending like rain and hail on the demon horn. Sha Hualing led her troops and fled while summoning a bolt of red gauze over her head, which she threw upwards. Unfortunately, it simply couldn't block the fierce rain of sword glares. The red gaze was quickly pierced full of holes. On top of that, Cheng Chong mountain sect disciples were hemming the demons in, so most of the horde suffered great injuries or were captured. Only the small heart of the group that had kept near Sha Hualing managed to escape down the mountain, thoroughly battered and humiliated. After returning his sword to his sheath, Lu Qingji turned stone-faced to examine the condition of the wound on Shen Qingchu's arm. The Qingjing Peak's disciples also came to surround them, more than 10 faces all filled with the same anxious expressions. Shen Qingchu sighed. It was definitely the right decision to send Ying to copy Shu Yi and pound on the wall. It was definitely the right decision to send Ying to copy Shu Yi and pound on the wall of Ling Shi caves, wailing until you came out. Who's Shi Yi? Asked Lu Qingju's. The world's greatest beauty, said Shen Qingchu. How am I? Lu Qingji humphed. You won't die for now. And Shu Yi, it's explained who that is. It's a nickname for an actress, Wang Ling, after a character she played in the Chinese soap opera Romance in the Rain. One of her most famous scenes involved her banging on the door to confront the girl who stole her fiancé. So, Lu Qingji humphed. You won't die for now. Though he said this, he didn't stop sending spiritual energy to Shen Qingchu's body through his left hand, and his expression became increasingly grave. Shen Qingchu looked at his hand. Lu Qingji empathetically clarified, "I'm repaying my debt from the Lingxi caves." So damn tsundere. His plan was to recruit Lu Qingji as a teammate had promised, but the meridians of Shen Qingchu's entire body subsequently underwent a series of convulsions, and he was unable to smile. Lu Shushu, what does the poison without a cure truly have no cure? Lu Binghe asked. Lu Qingchu glanced at him, but before he could answer, Shen Qingchu's knees wobbled and he almost fell into a kneel. Luckily, Lu Binghe had been supporting him the entire time, but Shen Qingchu really couldn't stand anymore. He waved his hand. Let me lie down. Let me lie down for a while." Lu Binghe had never seen Shen Qingchu so weak. He knelt beside Shen Qingchu with bloodshot eyes, choking on sobs. "Shizun!" With great difficulty, Shen Qingchu lifted an arm and patted Binghe's head, like he'd always wanted to. The mouthful of fresh blood he'd been holding back finally spilled flatteringly forth. Even if it was going to be like this, he persisted and tenaciously offered a crucial line to farm more favors. "I knew that you'd definitely win." Upon hearing this, a tremor traveled through Lu Binghe's entire body. Thinking about it afterwards, Shen Qingchu concluded that if he'd been looking at this from an omniscient reader's point of view, he'd have had an outburst, smashing the book down and cursing, "The fuck is with this character, huh? Hurting him in one moment, saving him the next. He's messed up in the head. Multiple personalities, nut job." At this time, the system sent a notification. Shen Qingchu's character complexity rating +20. Character depth rating +20. Character suspense rating +10. Total B points +50. Shen Qingchu was horrified. This is how character depth was calculated? Also, please don't randomly create strange point types. Thank you. His vision going dark, Shen Qingchu lifted his head, and he thought he saw Lu Binghe's tears falling from his eyes like pearls. He had to be mistaken. That was the last thought before he lost consciousness. And that is the end of this chapter. I'll quickly put my bookmark in. Well, I hope you are so far enjoying the book, and I will see you in the next chapter.